Salman Rushdie, one of the great contemporary writers of the English language, describes in a book, Imaginary Homelands Essays and Criticism, how can literature, in his words, great literature, serve the interests of a community. He defends that literature has the power to speak to many voices and give also a space to many voices. And these voices can speak of everything in all possible ways, even of conflict. This will be the first point to remember for understanding the importance of literature that portrays a multicultural environment. For readers, literature can represent a space for representing the cultural diversity that surrounds us and to discover it. Finally, we also have to consider reading model criticism proposed by several authors as a practice of promoting interculturality based on literature. The formulation points out the potential of literature, but also the need of materialization through material selection and reading practices that accompany the definition of intercultural education. Considering literature as a source of cultural diversity does not constitute an exercise in difficult imagination. However, Salman Rushdie, on another text called Outside the Whale, reinforces the idea that literature will only be understood as firmly planted in history. He writes, for each text, one context. For each text, one context, he writes. All the work of art, be it of it for entertainment or considered to be of the order of higher education, emerges from a social and political context and from a society to which it responds aesthetically and ethically. Extending this way of thinking literature assumes that we do not isolate texts in ivory towers. The whole work of literature occupies a political and social practice and space and represents and shapes social and cultural relations of power and cannot be separated from either politics or history. This has been a way of working and reflecting on literature as a way of preparing us readers for life in radically transformed societies, multicultural, organized in globalized networks, increasingly interdependent, and simultaneously open to becoming aware of their own specific ways of organizing. In recent international studies centered on cultural rights of pre colonization inhabitants in Australia, United States, Canada, or immigrant communities in Europe, as well as in issues of universal rights, power relations and representation, representativeness, contemporary issues of multi ethnicity, minorities, and migrations are addressed in literature. All of these studies prove the educational potential of literature for the promotion of intercultural dialogue, for the development of a critical awareness of the world, and for the educational promotion of both tolerance towards those perceived as different, as well as solidarity with those who suffer any kind of marginalization or forgetfulness in contemporary societies. From another perspective, more pedagogical than literary, multicultural literature is a set of works that are used to destabilize the dominant culture and to correct the canons of what should be read. It is not the content of the books themselves that is multicultural, but that they can be used to diversify a canon of books or represent cultures that are left out of a particular culture that makes them multicultural. We can find three types of works: those that promote the social awareness of racism, the injustice, inequalities, conflicts, and discrimination, usually written from an ethnocentric perspective that make the experience exotic and different. The second category of melting pot books includes books that dilute the social experience under the cover of a notion of the universality of the human. Humans are universal, so these books they point out this idea of universality. So a melting pot, all cultures in this big melting pot. The third category of culturally sensitive books encompasses those that focus exclusively on migration and cultural experiences from the perspective of the migrants or refugees in their choice of the protagonists, themes, and motives. There are also culturally neutral books that use decorative reasons in the context of diverse activities. One can read in a multicultural and critical way several works of literature that are not properly considered multicultural. Tolerance and understanding of the other can only be achieved by critically examining the narrative conventions and helping the reader to question the society you live in. So, some of the books, even if they are not explicitly multicultural, they can help us to examine multicultural issues and cultural diversity issues by analyzing them and by examining them. So we can question our society and we can act accordingly.